The studio lights of the view were brighter than usual that morning, almost blinding, as if the room itself sensed something unpredictable was about to unfold. The audience clapped politely as the cameras rolled, but there was an undercurrent of curiosity in the air. Today's guest wasn't just another Hollywood name. It was Scarlett Johansson, one of the most recognizable faces in the world. An actress whose career had stretched from indie films to global blockbusters, from quiet dramatic performances to dominating the box office as the fierce Natasha Romanoff in the Black Widow era of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The hosts exchanged smiles as the introduction played, but sitting closest to Scarlett was Sara Haines, leaning slightly forward in her chair. Sara had built her reputation on warmth and relatability. Viewers loved her for the way she laughed easily and shared stories about her own life. Growing up in Iowa, her time working behind the scenes at the Today Show, and eventually becoming one of the most trusted voices on daytime television. Her career had been a journey from production assistant to national television personality, and fans often admired how she balanced fame with her devotion to her family. But today, something about her expression felt sharper than usual. The host smiled toward Scarlett as the applause faded. "So Scarlett," Sara began lightly, "first of all, welcome back. It's always exciting to have you here." Scarlett smiled politely, adjusting the sleeve of her jacket. "Thanks for having me." The audience cheered again. Sara continued, her tone conversational but curious. "You've had such an incredible career, from early films like Lost in Translation to global hits like Avengers, Endgame. And now you're producing more projects, stepping behind the camera as well. It's a huge shift." Scarlett nodded slowly. "Yeah, it's been an exciting transition." Sara tilted her head. "But with that success comes a lot of public attention. Fame, expectations, even controversy sometimes." Scarlett's smile thinned slightly. The audience shifted in their seats. Sara leaned forward. "There's been a lot of conversation lately about how Hollywood handles creative control, especially after your very public dispute with the Walt Disney Company over the streaming release of Black Widow. Looking back now, do you think that conflict changed how people see you?" A ripple moved through the crowd. Scarlett inhaled slowly. "It changed how I see the industry," she said calmly. The room quieted. Sara pressed on, though her voice remained polite. "Some critics said it was a bold stand for actors' rights. Others said it looked like a battle over money." Scarlett looked directly at her. "Well," she replied softly, "people can interpret things however they want." For a moment, the tension was almost invisible, but unmistakable. Scarlett's voice carried a calm edge. "But standing up for fair agreements isn't about money. It's about respect." The audience murmured in agreement. Sara nodded, though the slight crease between her brows suggested she wasn't ready to move on yet. "And you've always been outspoken," she said, "even earlier in your career. Some people admire that. Others say it makes interviews unpredictable." Scarlett laughed lightly. Unpredictable isn't always a bad thing. A few audience members chuckled, but the atmosphere had shifted. The conversation was no longer a casual promotional appearance. It was becoming something else. And just before the tension could settle into silence, the narrator's voice, imagined by the viewer, cuts through the moment like a spark. If you love stories about explosive celebrity moments and dramatic interviews like this one, don't forget to subscribe to Talk Battles, hit like, and leave a comment about what you think is really happening in this conversation. Because what happens next, no one in the studio saw coming. Sara leaned back slightly, glancing at her notes. "So let's talk about your latest projects," she said. "You're producing more now. You're developing new films, even directing." Scarlett nodded. "Yeah, I'm focusing on projects that tell stories I care about." Sara smiled. "That must feel different than when you started acting as a child." Scarlett's expression softened. "It does. When I was younger, I was just trying to survive auditions and find roles." She paused. "My mom used to take me to casting calls all over New York." The audience listened quietly. Scarlett continued, her voice reflective. "We didn't know what would happen. But those early experiences, they shaped everything." Sara nodded thoughtfully. "And now," she said, "you're one of the most influential women in Hollywood." Scarlett shrugged slightly. "I just try to do work that matters." But something about Sara's next question changed the energy again. "And do you ever worry," she asked carefully, "that the industry you're helping reshape might also push people away?" Scarlett blinked. "What do you mean?" Sara hesitated for a fraction of a second. Well, some producers have said privately that big stars demanding more control can make projects harder to manage. A hush fell over the audience. Scarlett leaned back slowly in her chair. And when she spoke again, her tone was calm, but unmistakably sharper. "Are you asking me," she said quietly, "if actors should stay quiet?" The audience gasped softly. Sara raised her hands slightly. No, that's not what I meant." But the spark had already been lit, and the rest of the conversation was about to explode. "If you'd like, I can also write part 2, part 3, and part 4, the confrontation plus viral aftermath, in the same cinematic style." The studio of The View had suddenly become quieter than anyone expected for a daytime talk show. Just moments earlier, the audience had been laughing and clapping, enjoying the familiar rhythm of celebrity promotion and lighthearted conversation. But now, after Sara Haines asked her last question, the atmosphere felt charged. Across the table, Scarlett Johansson leaned back slightly in her chair. Her expression remained composed, but the subtle tension in her posture was impossible to ignore. "Are you asking me if actors should stay quiet?" Scarlett had asked. For a moment, even the cameras seemed to pause. Sara blinked quickly and adjusted the papers in front of her, letting out a small breath, as if trying to smooth over the moment before it became something bigger. "No," Sara said carefully, offering a reassuring smile. "That's not what I meant at all. I think actors speaking up can be important." The audience relaxed slightly, but Scarlett didn't immediately respond. Instead, she studied Sara for a moment, as if deciding whether the conversation was about to move forward or deepen. "I just think," Sara continued, "that sometimes when powerful voices in Hollywood push back against studios, people wonder where the balance is." Scarlett folded her hands together on the table. "The balance," she replied calmly, "is fairness." A few members of the audience clapped quietly. Sara nodded, though her expression remained thoughtful. "You know," she said, "I've worked in television a long time. Before I ever sat at this table, I was running scripts backstage, producing segments at the Today Show, trying to understand how this whole machine works." Scarlett listened politely. Sara continued, leaning slightly forward now. "And one thing I learned is that media, movies, TV, talk shows, it's a collaboration. Everyone has to compromise at some point." Scarlett tilted her head. "Compromise is important," she agreed. "But so is standing your ground." The room filled with a soft murmur. The conversation had become philosophical, almost like a debate between two professionals from different corners of the entertainment industry. Sara smiled slightly. "And you've done that more than once." Scarlett laughed quietly. "Apparently." Sara flipped a page of her notes. "There was the very public legal battle with the Walt Disney Company when Black Widow premiered simultaneously in theaters and streaming. That story dominated headlines for weeks." The audience shifted again. Scarlett's expression remained calm, but her voice carried weight when she answered. "That situation wasn't about drama," she said. "It was about honoring agreements." Sara nodded. "And in the end, the dispute was settled." "Yes," Scarlett replied. "But the conversation it started about streaming, contracts, and actors' rights is still happening." A few audience members clapped again. Sara leaned back slightly, studying Scarlett in a new way now, not just as a guest, but as someone who had shaped industry conversations. "You've had a fascinating career arc," Sara said thoughtfully. "From a young actress navigating Hollywood to someone influencing how the industry operates." Scarlett smiled faintly. "Sometimes it doesn't feel that dramatic." The audience chuckled. Sara tapped her pen again, thinking. "But let me ask you something more personal," she said. Scarlett nodded. "When you first started acting, when you were a kid in New York doing auditions, did you ever imagine you'd become one of the most powerful voices in Hollywood?" Scarlett paused. The question seemed to take her back for a moment. "No," she said softly. She glanced down briefly before looking back up. "When I was filming Lost in Translation, I was just trying to figure out who I was as an actress." The audience listened closely. "That film changed everything for me," Scarlett continued. "I was young, still discovering my voice. Suddenly people were calling it one of the most memorable performances of that year." Sara smiled warmly. "It's still considered one of the defining films of the early 2000s. Scarlett nodded. "It taught me that storytelling can be quiet and powerful at the same time." For a moment, the tension that had filled the studio earlier seemed to soften. But Sara's next words slowly steered the conversation back toward sharper territory. "You've played so many different characters," she said. from introspective roles like that to action heroes. The audience clapped again when Sara mentioned Scarlett's time in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And your role as Black Widow became iconic. Scarlett smiled. That character changed my life. Sara nodded. But with icons come expectations, she said. Scarlett's smile faded just slightly. Sara continued carefully. Some critics say superhero franchises dominate Hollywood so much that other kinds of stories struggle to get attention. Scarlett leaned forward now. That's a conversation worth having, she said. But I don't think the blame belongs to actors. Sara raised an eyebrow. No, Scarlett shook her head. Actors don't decide the entire market. Studios invest in what audiences support. The audience murmured again. Sara smiled slightly. That sounds like a very diplomatic answer. Scarlett laughed. It's also the honest one. The tension between them had evolved into something more nuanced, less confrontational, but still electric. Sara looked out at the audience for a moment before turning back. You know what I find interesting? She said. What's that? Scarlett asked. Sara paused. You've been famous for over 20 years, she said. And yet people still feel like they don't fully know you. Scarlett blinked slightly, surprised by the observation. Sara leaned forward again. Who is Scarlett Johansson when the cameras turn off? The audience leaned in. Because suddenly, the conversation had shifted again, from industry politics to something far more personal. Scarlett took a slow breath. And the answer she was about to give would change the mood of the entire studio. The question from Sara Haines lingered in the air, almost echoing across the studio of The View. Who is Scarlett Johansson when the cameras turn off? For a moment, the room felt unusually still. The audience, which had been reacting to every twist in the conversation, suddenly fell quiet. Even the hosts sitting nearby seemed to lean slightly closer, sensing that the discussion had crossed from industry talk into something more personal. Across the table, Scarlett Johansson didn't answer right away. Instead, she let out a soft breath and smiled faintly, as if weighing how much of herself she was willing to reveal in front of millions of viewers. That's a good question, she said finally. The audience chuckled softly. Scarlett rested her hands together on the table, her voice calmer now, more reflective. When the cameras turn off, she continued, I'm just someone trying to balance a very normal life with a very unusual career. Sara nodded, encouraging her to go on. Scarlett glanced toward the audience briefly before continuing. I wake up thinking about my family, my daughter, my husband, school schedules, dinner plans, the same things a lot of people worry about. A warm ripple of laughter moved through the crowd. It was a reminder that behind the global fame, the red carpets, and the billion-dollar box office numbers, there was still a person navigating everyday life. Sara smiled warmly. You've talked before about how becoming a parent changed your perspective. Scarlett nodded. It completely reshaped it. She paused. When you're younger in Hollywood, everything feels urgent. Every role, every headline, every interview. The audience listened carefully. But when you become a parent, she continued, you realize the world is much bigger than your career. Sara leaned forward. And yet, she said, your career has only grown bigger. The audience laughed again. Scarlett smiled. Yeah, it's been a strange balance. She continued reflecting on the different stages of her career. Starting as a child actor in New York, gaining international recognition through films like Lost in Translation, and eventually stepping into the global spotlight through the Marvel Cinematic Universe as the legendary spy Black Widow. That role followed me for over a decade, Scarlett said thoughtfully. Sara nodded. And millions of fans loved it. They still do, Scarlett replied with a soft smile. But it also taught me something important. The audience leaned in again. That fame isn't permanent. Sara raised an eyebrow. Interesting, she said. Most people assume the opposite. Scarlett shook her head gently. No career stays at the top forever. What matters is how you evolve. The comment felt honest, almost philosophical. But Sara wasn't finished digging deeper. And is that why you've started producing more projects? She asked. Scarlett nodded. Yes, I wanted more creative influence. I wanted to help shape stories instead of just appearing in them. Sara smiled. That's a big step. It is, Scarlett admitted. She then spoke about her production company and the kinds of stories she hoped to bring to the screen. Character-driven films, unique voices, projects that might not otherwise receive major studio attention. The audience applauded again. But Sara's next question shifted the tone once more. You've been incredibly successful, she said slowly. But you've also faced criticism over the years. Scarlett's expression remained neutral. Sara continued carefully. Some people have said that Hollywood's biggest stars sometimes struggle to understand the pressures faced by smaller actors. The room grew quiet again. Scarlett's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger but in concentration. What kind of pressures? She asked. Sara gestured slightly. The uncertainty, the constant additions, the lack of job security. Scarlett nodded slowly. I understand that reality very well. Sara seemed slightly surprised. You do? Scarlett leaned forward. Before I ever landed major roles, I spent years auditioning, being rejected, wondering if I would ever work again. The audience murmured. And even after success, Scarlett continued, there's still uncertainty. Sara tilted her head. Really? Scarlett smiled faintly. In this industry, every project feels like a gamble. The honesty struck a chord with the audience. For a moment, the tension from earlier seemed replaced by something more human, a shared understanding between host, guest, and viewers. But then Sara asked one more question, and this one would shift the conversation again. Do you ever regret becoming famous? The room went silent. Scarlett looked at Sara for a long moment. Then she leaned slightly closer to the microphone. No, she said calmly. But I do regret how the public sometimes treats fame. The audience reacted instantly. Sara blinked. What do you mean by that? She asked. Scarlett's expression hardened slightly. People think fame means you owe them every detail of your life. The tension was returning. Scarlett continued. They forget actors are still people with boundaries. Sara folded her hands together. But that attention also comes with the success, she said gently. Scarlett nodded. Yes. Then she looked directly at Sara. But that doesn't mean we stop being human. The audience erupted into applause. For a moment, even Sara seemed impressed by the clarity of Scarlett's answer. But the conversation had reached a point where both women understood something important. This interview had become far more intense than anyone expected. And the final moments of the show were about to leave the entire studio talking. The applause inside the studio of The View slowly faded, but the energy in the room hadn't settled. If anything, the tension had grown thicker in the final minutes of the interview. Across the table, Sara Haines glanced briefly toward the production crew, then back at Scarlett Johansson. The conversation had moved through Hollywood politics, fame, family, and personal boundaries, and the audience could feel they were approaching the closing moments of something unusually intense for a daytime talk show. Sara leaned slightly forward again, her voice softer now. You've been incredibly honest today, she said. Scarlett nodded politely. I try to be. Sara paused, almost reflecting on the conversation that had unfolded in front of millions of viewers. You know, she said thoughtfully, one of the reasons audiences connect with actors is because they feel like they know them. Scarlett smiled faintly. And sometimes that's true. But sometimes, Sara added, it isn't. Scarlett tilted her head. That's the complicated part of fame. The audience listened closely. Sara continued. You've built a career that spans more than 2 decades, from early dramatic films like Lost in Translation to global blockbusters like Avengers: Endgame. The audience clapped again at the mention of the massive film. And of course, Sara added with a grin, fans still associate you with Black Widow in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Scarlett laughed softly. That role will probably follow me forever. Sara nodded. But now you're stepping into new territory, producing, developing projects, shaping stories from behind the camera. Scarlett's voice grew more determined. Yes, I want to help create opportunities for new voices. The audience responded with supportive applause. Sara leaned back slightly in her chair. That's something we actually have in common, she said. Scarlett raised an eyebrow, curious. Sara smiled. Before I ever became a host, I spent years behind the scenes, working production, learning how television works, trying to understand what audiences connect with. She paused. And eventually I ended up here. The crowd applauded warmly for the host. Sara continued, reflecting on her journey from working at the Today Show to becoming one of the recognizable faces on daytime television. It took a long time to get comfortable sitting at this table, she admitted. Scarlett nodded with genuine respect. Hosting live television isn't easy. Sara laughed. Neither is surviving Hollywood for 20 years. The audience erupted into laughter and applause again. The tension that had filled the studio earlier was slowly dissolving, replaced by something closer to mutual respect. Sara looked toward Scarlet again. But I do want to say something, she added. Scarlet waited. Sara spoke carefully. I think conversations like this matter, even when they're uncomfortable. Scarlet nodded slowly. I agree. The audience applauded again. Sara continued. People watching at home may not realize how complicated these industries are. Movies, television, media, they're constantly changing. Scarlet added quietly. And the people inside them are changing too. For a moment, both women sat silently, the conversation settling into its final rhythm. Then Sara glanced toward the camera. Well, she said with a smile, this has certainly been one of our more memorable conversations. The audience laughed knowingly. Scarlet smiled too. I had a feeling it might be. Sara turned slightly toward her guest. Thank you for being here, and for being so open. Scarlet nodded. Thank you for asking the questions. The two women shared a brief handshake across the table. But even as the segment ended, the energy in the room suggested something bigger had just happened. Because within minutes of the broadcast ending, clips from the conversation began spreading online. Fans on social media debated the exchange between Scarlet and Sara. Some praised Scarlet for defending actors' boundaries and speaking honestly about fame. Others admired Sara's willingness to ask difficult questions on live television. Entertainment blogs began analyzing the moment. Commentators discussed Scarlett's reflections on fame, her legal battle with the Walt Disney Company, and how her career, from indie films to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, had transformed her into one of Hollywood's most influential voices. Within hours, the interview was trending across entertainment media. Clips of the conversation were replayed, dissected, and debated by fans everywhere. But perhaps the most powerful part of the moment wasn't the tension. It was the honesty. Two women from different sides of the entertainment world, one a Hollywood superstar, the other a seasoned television host, sitting across from each other and speaking openly about fame, responsibility, and the complicated realities of life in the spotlight. And as the cameras finally cut away, the studio audience rose for one last round of applause. The conversation might have ended, but the story had only just begun. And now we want to hear from you. What did you think about this intense conversation between Scarlett Johansson and Sara Haines on The View? Was Scarlett right to defend her perspective about fame and Hollywood? Or do you think Sara's tough questions were necessary? Tell us your opinion in the comments below. And if you enjoy dramatic celebrity moments, powerful interviews, and behind-the-scenes stories from the entertainment world, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Talk Battles for more explosive narratives just like this one.